Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Careers on the Move, a podcast from Cargomatic, telling you about people doing incredible things in the world of supply chain. Thrilled to welcome another great guest to the podcast today. His name is Jon Gold. He's the Vice President of Supply Chain and Customs Policy for the National Retail Federation. Jon, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Tyler. Thanks. Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. This is a really interesting time to be talking to you because this is obviously a really busy time of year when it comes to supply chain and retail. And there seems to be more conversation just around supply chain now than maybe there has been in the past. What's driving so much interesting conversation around just the world of supply chain right now?
I think it's just all the ongoing challenges that we're facing in the supply chain that's been apparent throughout the pandemic. Is everybody wanted to know if they're going to be able to get their toilet paper or their Christmas merchandise. I think has been front and center for everybody from the start of the pandemic and has just continued now. And obviously the nightly press, nightly news doing ongoing stories about the impact on the supply chain and the impact it's having on everybody certainly has been front and center. So I think a lot more people are paying attention to the supply chain where, previously they hadn't really thought about it.
Yeah, that's a great point. It does seem to be maybe a term that people who have never said the word supply chain before are now debating it around the kitchen table or at the water cooler and things like that. So it certainly makes it an interesting time to be discussing this. Now, I know that part of what you do, a lot of your job involves lobbying and working with Congress on behalf of the retail and supply chain industries. Tell me a little bit about that and what your day-to-day role looks like.
Sure. So my role here within National Retail Federation, I'm on the government affairs staff. As you noted, I'm one of the lobbyists on staff, and I handle all of the trade, transportation, supply chain, product safety related issues. So everything from the sourcing of products to the transportation of products, all the way through the supply chain from basically beginning to end. And I tackle all those different issues working with members of Congress as well as regulators, the different agencies that have a role in the supply chain. So, right now my daily agenda is, talking to Hill staff about things like the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, which will hopefully be passed in the next 2 days on the House side. Very, very thankful about that. Continuing to talk to the White House and other federal agencies about the ongoing challenges that our members are facing with regards to the supply chain. Despite the actions that the White House has taken, there are still a lot of challenges that retailers are facing with getting product to their stores and to consumers. Then talking to press as well, educating them about the ongoing issues that are happening and why it's important for folks to understand what's happening with the supply chains and, the need for all parties to work together and be creative about solutions going forwards.
Supply chain is obviously a complicated thing, right? That has a lot of layers to it and a lot of different moving parts and pieces. I guess that's why it's called logistics, right? Is all the different moving parts that have to play into things. But give people an idea maybe of the role that legislative bodies can have when it comes to supply chain and modernizing things and moving things forward. What sorts of role can Congress play in making the supply chain run more efficiently and more smoothly?
Sure. I mean, despite the fact that the supply chain is, run by the private sector, the government still plays a very large role in setting the regulations that are in place for how those operations work. Whether it's the Federal Maritime Commission working on new rules and regulations with regards to detention and demurrage, which we think is incredibly important, holding carriers and terminal operators, feet to the fire on key issues. Clarifying the roles and responsibilities is incredibly important. Working with DOT on things like hours of service is incredibly important. Creating new information technology systems, port platforms that provide stakeholders better visibility into what's happening. I think there's certainly a role for the federal government to play, as well as state and local governments, as far as what are the environmental requirements that are going to be on truckers and warehousing. And any local restrictions on movement of goods is incredibly important. So there certainly are roles for the government at every level to play, but I think the best role they can play is as a convener to bring the right parties together to talk about solutions that are actually going to help improve the situation and not make it worse.
You mentioned earlier a couple of bills that are working their way through various parts of the legislature. What stories do you think are most important for people to be following these days if they want to stay up to date with what's going on regarding supply chain, especially in the areas that you work? What are the stories that are worth following for people?
I think certainly anything on the congressional federal level, looking at things like the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. The FMC is now starting a new project looking at data and how can data help the situation. The FMC is hosting their first working group meeting today with Commissioner Bensel, taking a look at data and what is the lack of data that we have right now to help the system, what's needed, how do we work better together, how do we collaborate in a better atmosphere. So I think those are some of the stories that are really important to keep an eye on. But again, looking at some of the local issues, looking at what's happening at the ports of LA and Long Beach with their dwell fees and the fact that they keep delaying the implementation because we are making progress. That's not to say the situation is solved, because we all know there's a long way to go. There's still many ships sitting out at anchor that need to come in and unload their cargoes. There are a lot of different pieces, as you noted, that there's no one silver bullet that's going to fix everything. But looking at each of these little pieces together, I think is going to be very important to really solve the situation.
I want to take a small pivot and just talk a little bit more about your career, Jon, and how you got to where you are, because you sit at such an interesting intersection. Like you mentioned, the supply chain is run by private businesses, but you are working with the governing body in the United States to create atmosphere and a climate that works well for these private companies. So how did you get to this position, and what sorts of steps did you take in your career that led you here?
Yeah, I kind of fell into the lobbying world. I went to school here in Washington, D.C. and studied international business, and, had no clue exactly what I was going to do, when I graduated. Had the fortunate opportunity to intern my junior year of college for another trade association representing the electronics industry. This was back in the summer of '93 for the government affairs team, and it was more working on trade policy related issues. So it was a summer of NAFTA discussions, summer of U.S.-Japan trade relations, U.S.-China trade relations, and kind of fell in love with the policy aspect of it. So graduated college and got my first job on kind of the ground floor of another retail trade association as a coordinator. Really wasn't doing lobbying yet, but went to my boss and said, hey, I want to do international trade work. And 6 months later, I was doing lobbying work on China permanent normal trade relations status. And kind of grew after that. I think really when things kind of hit home on the intersection between trade and supply chain was kind of post 9/11, and working on all the port security related issues that we were working on, as well as the after that, the labor contract, the 10-day lockout and that intersection. So really kind of built out my portfolio working on the supply chain as a whole, and spent 10 years with a different retail trade group. Then went to Customs and Border Protection in 2006 to work on the implementation of the Safe Port Act, which was the major port security legislation, development of things like CTPAT, the importer security filing, and then was at CBP for about a year and a half, and then came over to National Retail Federation in October 2007, and have been here ever since and working really on the supply chain, value chain related issues. Which I just find fascinating, and working in the retail industry, it's really been a unique opportunity to see some of the most forward-thinking companies, and how they're adapting and dealing with some of the most major issues that we've seen impacting the supply chain, from sourcing to what we're seeing now in the pandemic. So it's been a unique opportunity, and I've enjoyed the work, and enjoyed not just the industry, the retail industry, but all the partners that we get to work with as well, like Cargomatic and the ports and others, because it's so integral to have that partnership with other groups. So it's great to be in this place, to be able to bring folks together and have some of those discussions and really work collaboratively on some solutions.
Do you feel like that's really the thing that drew you most to this line of work, just seeing how the puzzle pieces fit together and the various roles that different parties play, and kind of getting to be at the center of all of that? Is that kind of what drew you to what you get to do?
Yeah. Again, I had no intention to get into politics when I started it. When it came to DC, it just I hate to say, seeing how the sausage got made was interesting, but just knowing how passionate I am about things like trade and how important I think it is, and to be able to be part of the ongoing discussions and promotion of that, and being able to bring our members together, have conversations with them about the impacts, what it means for them, what it means for their companies, their workers, and consumers, I think is incredibly important. And being able to relay those messages to the right folks, either up in Capitol Hill or within the government, and talk about why these issues are important and what we can do together to advance the cause.
The more conversations we have on this podcast with people from various aspects and sectors of the supply chain, the more you realize that there are people with numerous different abilities and lots of room within this particular line of work and area for people with all kinds of backgrounds and knowledge and skill sets and all of those sorts of things. What particular maybe skill sets do you feel like you possess that have enabled you to have success in this particular role?
I think my ability to bring folks together and have conversations and push forwards, I think has been incredibly important. I'm not one of those who's worked in the field and worked on to do that, but being able to work with our members, bring them together, have a discussion about the impact or what we need to have happen, but then bring in other parties as well within the supply chain and have those conversations. So I think that probably has been one of my biggest accomplishments, which I think is incredibly important, because I think folks need to recognize you can't just do this on your own. I think we've got to be able to work together to address these issues. And these issues have existed for the 20 years plus I've been doing this. There always seems to be something, and the ability to work together to try and address the situation is really important. I think that's why I find this industry so fascinating, all the different components of it, recognizing how important those partnerships are and the need to folks to work together and want to work together and be collaborative and be forward thinking is really important.
So, Jon, if there is, a college student, a young person out there that might be in a similar boat to where you were in college and not really sure how you were going to apply what you learned into a career, and they're considering, something in supply chain or maybe thinking about it, what sorts of pieces of advice would you give them from your perspective and from your experience that could maybe help them kind of find their way into this line of work?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many opportunities within the supply chain. From working with a transportation provider to a tech company, and I think really utilizing what their skill set is. But I think the best opportunity might be look for internship opportunities and start on the ground floor and work your way up. I think is incredibly important. I think looking for any and all opportunities is important. It is important to learn a multitude of skill sets within the supply chain because there's so much going on, and be creative and want to take an opportunity. Don't fear failure, because you only learn from that. So I think wanting to be, take any opportunity you can get, I think is incredibly important. And I think, take a risk. There are opportunities there, and I think folks are looking for those that want to step up and be leaders too. So, engage with any opportunity you can get to work collaboratively with the team, whatever team you're put on.
Obviously, just with so much new technology these days, things are advancing at a rapid rate. Where do you see things headed in the next 5 to 10 years? If you're willing to make a prediction of sorts or something along those lines, where do you see supply chain moving just with the influx of IoT type of technology and all the various things that are coming in to try to make things more efficient? You got autonomous robots in some facilities. Where do you see things heading in 5 years?
I think technology and automation are critical to the success of the supply chain going forward. So digitization is incredibly important. We've got to have the better connectivity among all partners, but also how do we do things in a more efficient and productive manner? Everybody wants to keep talking about, when things go back to, quote unquote normal. I don't know what that quote unquote normal is going to be. And I think if anything, what we've learned throughout the pandemic is that normal didn't work. Because again, these issues existed well before the pandemic hit, and we've only been further exacerbated. So we've got to look at how do we become more productive, more efficient, and better utilize what we currently have. And I think the only way to do that is use technology. We got to figure out what that right technology is, because the same technology solution might not work for everybody. But I think we've got to start looking at that now, and how do we, create the supply chain in the future that really meets the needs for a 21st century supply chain, which is sorely lacking right now. But I think that technology, automation, digitization is incredibly important. And for those companies that are going to be on the forefront, leading that effort is going to be really important. but I think we've got to do it collectively and do it together. Because we've got to have that partnership. I keep reinforcing partnership, but it's just so critical for the success of the supply chain.
People can head to nrf.com to get more information about the National Retail Federation and the things that you do. Are there any other resources or anything that you'd like to point people to give people an idea of what the NRF does and the value that you're providing for retailers?
Yeah, I mean, I think our webcast obviously follows on Twitter. We're active on Twitter at NRF News. LinkedIn, all the social sites, but I think our website has the most up-to-date information with regards to everything that we're doing, from on the holiday information, our legislative agenda. We have a podcast that we do, Retail Gets Real, where we focus on a lot of different industry issues. We've done on supply chain, we've done on holidays. We are always looking for partners as well. So if folks have any questions about NRF and engagement in NRF, please do reach out to me. Happy to get folks involved.
Excellent stuff. That's Jon Gold, Vice President of Supply Chain and Customs Policy for the National Retail Federation. Jon, thank you so much for joining us here on Careers on the Move and sharing a little bit more about your experience and what you do on a day-to-day basis. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And everyone, thank you for tuning into another episode of Careers on the Move, a podcast from Cargomatic. We appreciate it very much. Of course, stay tuned for upcoming episodes of the show. You can find more episodes on Cargomatic's website, as well as on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, if you want to hear more about different things that are going on in the world of supply chain. And stay tuned. We'll be back soon with new episodes of the show. But for this one, for my guest today, Jon Gold, I've been your host, Tyler Kern. Thanks for joining us.